We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this morning is Metro Councilman Bob Mendes. Appreciate him coming on, talking about some of the legislation that's been passed. We're waiting to see what the governor will sign. And again, keeping in mind, he hasn't signed anything yet.
Right.
And until he does, it's not official. But a lot of this has already passed. It was passed this weekend. And the issue at hand is, how much of this is overstepping the bounds or is right on point for state lawmakers to kind of, go after some of what various municipalities do to govern locally. And what is your biggest concern here beyond, we talked about some of these, laws and how it goes. Do you worry about this because it just is going to take more power away from the local leaders? Where do you worry this is going to lead if it's unchecked?
The biggest concern is that we need to have local power over dealing with disease. Laws about epidemics and disease are as old as the state. Going back to the 1800s, every summer the city would have a malaria and cholera outbreak, and people who could afford to leave would go up to Mount Eagle, and that's where the communities up there started, was summer retreats from people from big cities getting away from disease. Local control over disease, we have a more dense population. We've got a different profile than suburban areas that are predominantly rural, and we should be able to call the shots on what happens with epidemics in our own community. That's the way it's been since the 1800s. That's the way it should keep being now. And this puts a substantial dent in our ability to act, lead for Nashville citizens when it comes to disease. Now, we all hope that COVID is abating and we don't get another spike and we all go about our business, but we don't know that right now, and it's just flat dangerous to people to make us run through the state government in order to act locally when it comes to serious disease.
So yeah, when you're talking about serious disease, and it does vary the severity depending on the density of the locale, you think that some of these laws that are kind of like going to limit the ability to mandate masks, among other things, is painting the whole state with the same brush, and that's not a great thing because it's much different in Davidson County than it is for folks in rural Pickett County.
Absolutely, and it's only a year and a half ago, but at the front end of this epidemic, like 80-some counties left to their own devices, the governor left to his own devices, didn't want to do anything, didn't want to install any controls whatsoever. And Nashville, frankly, led the way and was the first big city in the state to install executive orders for the health and well-being of our citizens. And the other cities followed, and eventually the state followed. And that's if you're coming from the perspective of one of the counties that's predominantly rural, you don't want any control. You don't want government telling you what to do about anything at all. Here in a big city, we got to have rules. We got to have norms about how people are going to behave and get along with one another. We live closer together to each other. We're denser. We've got more people from more places. We have to have local control in order to handle disease up front rather than waiting for the state to act.
You believe that the way the city did act early on, and there was controversy around that as well, the way it played, but are you a firm believer that saved lives? And do you fear that, if some of this blocks the ability to continue doing some of these safety steps, it could cost lives?
It clearly saved lives. Clearly, how Nashville has treated the epidemic has saved lives. There's been a horrible loss of life. My stepfather, who lives in town, is on oxygen still full-time 8 months after getting out of the hospital from COVID. People have had relatives, friends, acquaintances die. It's been tragic, but especially since vaccines have come around, our higher vaccination rate, which is attributable to Metro's plan, has clearly saved lives compared to surrounding counties as far as the rate of people dying. And at the front end of the disease, we had to tamp it down. And the fact that we got over the first several months without a bigger spike in COVID was directly attributable to Metro taking action.
So moving forward, and Metro wants to continue to take action as it monitors it. Things have gotten better, you're right, because of vaccines. But do you think that if your ability to react, if there's another spike, because these laws are in the point inhibit you from doing that, it could cost lives?
I think it definitely could cost lives. I mean, if we get another spike, because there's another variant, which a lot of medical professionals are worried about, it's hoping we get through the winter without some additional spike, but it's only hope, and hope's not a plan. Right. We are going to not have the ability to have our mayor sign executive orders. We're not going to be able to have these various mandates that are now outlawed, and we're going to have to ask permission from the state to do anything, and they're going into an election year, so I'm not optimistic about getting a lot of cooperation there.
All right, so let's just say that scenario you just described comes about. The question is, if the governor signs off on some of this, and who knows, ultimately, my guess he's going to sign off on some and he's going to not sign off on others. That's my guess how it's going to play out. But if it happens and it limits it, then it's on the books. The question is, what does Nashville do? And is that part of what was at the heart of your request in the letter?
Well, that is, and we asked for a report in 14 days because I tried reading through the legislation on Saturday morning after it got passed, and it's not well written. It reads like somebody put it together in 48 hours and signed it at midnight. It's got some quirkiness to it. So I felt like it was going to take a little while for Metro Legal and the mayor's office to really understand exactly what it means. Mm-hmm. And so, I want to know as soon as possible. I'd love to know yesterday, but I need to give the mayor's office and legal a little bit of time to understand it and come up with a plan. It could be that there are parts of it that that really turn out to be inapplicable. Like we heard from Metro Legal Director Wally Dietz yesterday that the taking away of our ability to pick our own health department director, there may be an argument that that's ineffective, that they didn't really take it away from us because they did a poor job drafting it. We'll have to see. I don't know the answer to that yet. Okay,
but I guess once they sift through it, and you're right, it's I can't make it through it. I mean, and really understand it. You need someone smarter than me. But I mean, once they get through it, then the things that you'll want them to be able to tell you is, one, all right, explain to me exactly what's really being suggested here and what it would require us to do. And then the more important question after that, especially if some of that's unpalatable, it will be, what are our options against it? And so I know you don't know what's in there, but the options, the way I look at it, is you can look at it and decide, well, we can comply with this, but we're just not. I mean, you're either going to comply or you're not. I don't think you can do it halfway. So, I mean, ultimately, you're going to wonder if Metro Legal says, look, if we decide we don't want to comply with this, what are our options?
Yeah, I think we're going to get some of everything. I think we're going to find there's some parts that they did such a bad job drafting it doesn't actually impact us. There's other things that are definitely going to apply, like they have changed the way school board elections work, and there's still some, I think, work going on to understand exactly how it's supposed to work, but we've got some of those coming up next year, and there's probably going to be a primary, at least a Republican primary for school board in May, 6 months away, probably. So there's some things we're going to have to do no matter what. There's some things they probably botched in how they draft it. And then there's going to be other things where Metro might be caught between a rock and a hard place. There's one provision in particular where the federal government is coming up with some regulations on Friday for one of their laws that may put us in a conflict where we can not comply with federal and state law. And if that pans out, there'll have to be a lawsuit, because I think Metro would be obligated to get a court to say, hey, do we follow federal law or do we follow state law? Which one do we do here?
We're going to go to a break. When we come back, I'm just curious, too, if you've had talks with, leaders in other cities, other communities, maybe Memphis and the like, and see, because, Nashville's not the only one, though I do think Nashville is largely the focus on a lot of this. And, of course, the state capital's right here as well. We'll take a break. And it's interesting. We haven't gotten many calls this morning. And if you have let's face it, this is being pushed by lawmakers because constituents, and there's a lot of people sick and tired of the masks and the mandates, and they want to get on with their lives, and they think things are better. And let me know if you live in the city or if you have a question or comment on how you think this should all play out. We'll hear from you. If not, sit back and listen, because we've got much more to talk with Councilman Mendes right after this.